Hello guys and welcome back. This is Jacob Payton and today I'm going to be talking about Allhallows Eve by Richard Laymon. This is of course a part of my Richard Laymon read-a-thon, which I am still continuing, and thanks to Kindle Unlimited might actually finish a lot sooner than I had planned, because I am now finding a lot of the books that I found harder to find of Richard Laymon's. I do believe he wrote, it was like 35-ish horror novels. I should probably know that off the top of my head if I'm going to do this read-a-thon, but I don't, so I'm sure someone will correct me in the comments, which is fine, because I would actually like to know the answer to that. If not, I will look it up myself later. But a lot of those are now posted on Amazon in digital format and are very easy to find, which is awesome. However, there are still a lot of books which are not. Now, let's jump into Allhallows Eve, which has a very neat cover, or at least this copy does. I am kind of blessed in the fact that I'm finding some of the cooler covers. At least in my opinion, I really like these covers. This is a headline. I think this is the UK edition. Some of the leisure horror covers, or at least leisure covers given to Richard Laymon, for the most part weren't great when compared to some of his older covers. But that is, once again, my opinion. Everyone's mileage may vary. And once again, you know, don't judge a book by its cover. So, if you've missed Laymon, you've missed a treat, says Stephen King at the top of this book, which is very nice. Now, nothing unusual ever happens in Ashburg until a local family are horribly mutilated and left to die in their own home. Since that night, the old Sherwood house has stood dark and abandoned, a constant reminder of the horrific killings. But when mysterious invitations begin to arrive announcing a party to be held there, nobody thinks it's a joke after all. And Allhallows Eve, everyone wants to party in a house of death. Bum, bum, bum. And then Dean Koontz follows it up with, no one writes like Laymon, and you're gonna have a good time with anything he writes. Now, with two very sincere sounding glowing endorsements on the back of this book, which I think were warranted, because this is a good book, or at least I think it's a good book. It's not a very long read, especially compared to The Island, which I reviewed before I reviewed this book. If you're watching these in order, which if you're not, then you have no idea what I'm talking about, which is completely fine. Ooh, almost dropped it. Which is why I'm also happy that in future videos I'll be doing this digitally, and then I can just kind of wave my arms like a crazy person without holding something in them because I am clumsy. So, I want to say everything I liked about this book. One, it happens near Halloween or Allhallows Eve, which I think is an excellent time to place a slasher. Two, it happens in a small town, which of course is where everyone needs to die on Halloween night, is a small town. Three, it happens in a creepy house in a small town, so of course. And four, most of the killings are either local law enforcement, nosy neighbors, or horny teenagers, all the people you expect to die in a horror movie. And so, without really breaking the mold, it does follow all of the horror movie tropes in what I like to think is a pretty great way, in my opinion. I did really enjoy this book. I didn't think it was as good as The Island in comparison, if I'm doing a side-by-side comparison, but it was a fun slasher, which, you know, I read this in one setting. It's not super long. It comes in at like, I think 230, 240 pages. So if you're used to reading bigger books, or you're a fast reader, I think, you know, you'll be able to breeze through this and you'll really enjoy it. Now, there are some cons. One, there wasn't, at least in my opinion, a lot of surprises. Like, it makes note of the mysterious invitations, but you know very clearly by, like, I don't know, the third or fourth or fifth chapter that, and the chapters aren't very long. Once again, this isn't a very long book, so this is pretty early on in the book. You already know that it's Eric who is giving out these invitations because his father is back in town, and his father is the killer, which it makes no qualms about. Once again, it comes to light that Eric's father is believed to have murdered the family that used to live in the house before mysteriously disappearing, and also that not only was he a killer, but he was a violent rapist. So, I mean, if talking about sexual assault triggers you, it definitely happens in this book, and it's talked about in this book, but it's not like some of the other Laymon books that's almost like the center of a lot of the story. I felt like, I mean, this is very much more into like the dynamics of this small town and how all these other interpersonal relationships are playing out, leading up to Allhallows Eve. For the most part, the main character is the deputy who kind of takes the reins of this investigation once people start disappearing around the house in the small town. But of course, it's a slasher, so he doesn't know it is happening around the house leading up to that. Eric is working with his father. You know this very early on. His father, who is a malicious killer, has promised Eric a lot of things. Which, another thing I didn't kind of like about this book is the depiction, and this is personal, by the way. This is just a personal... growing up, I was the child of a single mother. It very much depicts that, you know, sons of a single mother will have like some crazy violent tendencies, which I thought was not a very cool depiction, because, you know, some of the things Eric does even before he hooks up with his dad and plans this whole thing, it shows that he was very violent and aggressive towards any of his mom's boyfriends. It was like this whole thing, and I didn't like that depiction. So that was a con in my book. It might not be a con in yours. Honestly, you might not even care. But it did take away from the story for me when it came to the depictions of Eric Prince, who was, in a lot of ways, kind of depicted as this... you know, he had a lot of misunderstood tendencies, but it was, for the most part, blamed on the fact that his father was not in the picture, even though his mom seemed to be like a nice person. So yeah, it was like this whole thing. It was a whole thing which I didn't very much like. Another con is that, at least in my opinion, that unlike a lot of other Laymon books, a lot of the action, for the most part, when it comes to like the killings or even other small story notes, is happening off scene. Which seemed kind of like a weird thing, I guess, to me, if you're talking about like a slasher movie where you kind of expect to see the killings. There were several characters that you don't actually know how they died. It's just, this is how we found their body and we know the killer did it. Which I thought was kind of a weird thing, especially for Richard Laymon, who usually goes into a lot of detail about how people are killed. Once again, this may or may not affect how you read. I thought it was weird because it was a slasher book. It wasn't so much as I was like, I want to read about super gory deaths. It was like, hey, if this guy's, you know, if Jason Voorhees is swinging down his machete, I don't want to fade to black. If that makes sense. It might not make sense to you, it makes sense to me. So I thought that was a con. Also, when talking about the deaths of characters that were very much introduced as not only central to the story, but actual main characters, and you don't even know that they died until the end of the book. They just stop talking about them. Which is crazy because one of the characters this happens to is someone who's basically in a relationship with another main character and is introduced as a very important character, and then halfway through the book you just don't hear about them anymore. It does feel like there's a lot of gaps in this story, which I thought was a con. at least in my opinion. Like, that, if I was doing a pro and con sheet, that's a con in my opinion. I don't like having a lot of gaps in a story I'm reading, which I do know that there were a couple books, such as, I believe it's like The Woods Are Dark, where publishers actually cut a lot out. Once again, I have the UK edition of this book. I do not know if that happened. I am going to do some research and find out, because if that is, you know, what happened, that things were cut out or the publisher made a bunch of changes, then I am going to try to track down another copy, like I had to do with The Woods Are Dark, which is another book by Laymon, which I really liked, and I have the UK edition. And then I found out, as I was reading it, that some of the editions that were put out by some of his earlier publishers, Richard Laymon was very unhappy with, because they cut a lot of stuff out. I do not know if that happened with Allhallows Eve. It does feel like that possibly may have happened, just because a lot of things are kind of left unsaid, and the entire story is literally wrapped up in, like, Jesus, a 1-page epilogue. So, you know, it's kind of wrapped up on these, like, last really 3 pages of the book, and you know, it kind of just goes through all the things that happen. It's like, well, we took down the killer, and this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, which kind of felt kind of like a weak ending, I think, to me. But once again, your mileage may vary. You may love endings like that. It was a neatly tied up ending, which I know is important to a lot of people. I like neatly tied up endings as well. But once again, I just feel like more of these characters kind of should have gotten a little more of their just due, I guess, would be the way to phrase that. Now, with all that being said, I did like Allhallows Eve. I do recommend reading this book if you like Richard Laymon and you like slashers, because it does very much cover basically all of the main slasher tropes. And even though it did feel like things were missing near the end of the book, and that it was almost rushed after about like halfway through, like kind of like a rush to the finish line, I still very much enjoyed this book, and I think a lot of people will too. But once again, if you agree or disagree with anything I said in this video, please leave a comment. And if you want to see me talk about more horror books or Richard Laymon books or books in general, then please like and subscribe. Until then, I will see you next time.